In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. Rowena Caldwell wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the late afternoon sun burned low over Cedar Canyon's dusty Main Street. The trading post stood at the far end of the boardwalk, its wooden sign swinging on creaking hinges. Caldwell and Thorne's General Store. Ironwood barrels and sacks of grain lined the sidewalk, and a bell tinkled weakly when she pushed through. The swinging doors dot inside. The air was thick with dust motes dancing in shafts of dying light. Shelves sagged under the weight of flour, coffee beans, bolts of cloth, and tins of lamp oil. Behind the counter, Caleb Thorne polished a battered rifle barrel with a rag soiled by oil and soot. His lean silhouette was half swallowed by shadow, the only bright spot the glint of silver buckles at his hip. Rowena approached, her boots thudding softly against the planks. The baby in her arms let out a ragged wail, its small fists punching the air. She raised a hand to calm him, voice trembling. I need to leave him," she said, voice hoarse from weeks on the trail. "I can't feed him, and I can't." "Keep." Caleb's eyes flicked to the infant. He set the rifle aside, but neither spoke. The trading post was a godsend for travelers passing through, but Cedar Canyon was no place for a mother without the means to care for a child. Behind Rowena, the front door banged open. A trio of burly ranch hands swaggered in, backs to their horses tied outside. They wore buttoned vests and wide-brimmed hats tilted low. One spat a ribbon of tobacco juice onto the floor. "Thorne," their leader growled, voice low as grit. "You been heading folk off or letting 'em in?" Caleb dipped his chin. "Doesn't matter. They pay or they don't buy." The ranch hand laughed, boots echoing on wood. "This one's got a kilby. You want extra coin for the diapers?" He sneered at Rowena. "Or maybe the store's telling you it's one less mouth to feed." Rowena squeezed the baby tighter, cheeks flushed. "Sir," but the man cut her off. "Aw, come on, darlin'. Ain't no shame in partin' with a kid if you can't feed him. Hell, I'd take him off your hands." A cold silence fell. Caleb's hand drifted toward his rifle, and Rowena's heart hammered. She backed away, tears pricking her eyes. The men burst into laughter, tossing their hats onto the counter. Just then, a fourth figure slipped inside through the back door, a tall man with a weathered Stetson, coat dusted by the trail, and soft eyes that took in Rowena's trembling shoulders and the baby's clenched fists. He stepped forward, voice quiet but carrying the weight of certainty. "If you're offering, ma'am, I'll take you both." Time froze. The gauntlet of sneers and leers snapped silent as all eyes turned to him. Rowena blinked, unsure she'd heard right. The ranch hands straightened, uneasy under the stranger's gaze. Caleb swallowed. "You?" The stranger raised one brow, hat shadowing his face. "Name's Wyatt Boone. I'm in need of help back on my ranch, and it seems I'm in need of a mother for the little one." He lifted his chin, meeting Rowena's eyes. "What do you say?" Her breath caught. The baby gurgled against her cheek, and something in Wyatt's steady calm eased the terror in her chest. She glanced at the ranch hands. Her pride might break, but her child's life was at stake. Rowena took a trembling step forward, tears spilling free. You'd want us?" Wyatt Boone nodded, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Both of you." In that moment, with the sun dipping low and the dust swirling at his feet, Rowena realized the trading post had offered her something she never expected, a chance at a new beginning. But in Cedar Canyon, new beginnings cost more than a few dollars. They asked for courage, trust, and sometimes the kind of daring that turned strangers into family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Wyatt Boone led Rowena and little Jebediah down the narrow boardwalk, his tall silhouette framed by the dying sunlight. The trading post's wooden sign creaked behind them, and the dusty town of Cedar Canyon exhaled into evening calm. As they walked, Rowena's mind raced. Had she done the right thing? The baby nestled against her shoulder, eyes fluttering sleepily. Unaware of the weight of her decision. Out on the street, Wyatt paused at the hitching post where 3 horses stood, tethered. He swung up onto the middle mount without hesitation, and Rowena followed, settling Jebediah into a leather-backed cloth sling she'd borrowed from the trading post. Wyatt's horse, a sturdy bay with expressive eyes, snorted softly as she climbed into the saddle behind him. "Where are we headed?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "North ridge of the Boone Ranch," Wyatt replied, voice calm. "You'll like it. Quiet, with good water and room to breathe." They rode in silence through the falling dusk, the trail curling between red sandstone cliffs and sagebrush that released a sharp medicinal scent in the cooling air. Jebediah dozed against Rowena's chest, his breathing soft and regular. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt just a fraction lighter, inside a hidden corral marked by weathered posts and a fallen cedar beam. Wyatt guided her mount to a gentle stop. A single-lane path wound upward, and he swung down to lead her and the animals toward a modest homestead nestled in a sunlit clearing. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and lantern light glimmered at the windows. The cabin was built of sturdy logs, its roof sloped with rough-hewn shingles. A lean-to porch held a wooden rocking chair and a stack of firewood. Wyatt ushered Rowena inside, where the wood stove crackled, sending warmth into the small open room. A table hewn from local oak stood against the far wall, surrounded by simple chairs. A single bed, made with clean linen, waited in the corner. "Welcome home," Wyatt said softly. Rowena's voice caught in her throat. "I don't know how to. You'll learn," he interrupted gently. "Your son will teach you more than I ever could." He gestured toward a cradle beside the bed, hand-carved from a fallen cottonwood. Inside lay a patchwork blanket one she recognized from the trading post tucked around Jebediah's sleeping form. As she carefully lifted the baby and settled him in the cradle, Rowena's fingers brushed the rough wood. She inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and linen filling her senses. Fear and hope warred within her chest. Over the next hour, Wyatt walked her through the routines, fetching water from the spring, preparing simple meals of cornmeal mush and fresh goat's milk, stoking the stove at dusk and dawn, and tending to the small herd of goats that grazed on the outskirts of the clearing. Rowena listened intently, committing every detail to memory. That night, after securing the animals in the corral and sealing the cabin's shutters against a sudden gust of wind, Wyatt showed Rowena to the guest room, an enclosed loft above the main room, reached by a narrow ladder. The mattress was thin but warm, and a single oil lamp sat on a shelf. "Rest," Wyatt said softly, offering her a blanket woven with indigo threads. "You'll need your strength." Rowena nodded, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids. As she climbed the ladder, Jebediah stirred in the cradle, wailing softly. She descended again, lifted him into her arms, and pressed him close. "Sleep when he sleeps," Wyatt whispered. He stepped back into the shadows, silhouette framed in the doorway. Rowena held her son against her chest, rocking gently, his small face against her heart. The world beyond the cabin walls felt distant, almost unreal, a lifetime removed from the trading post where she'd tried to abandon him. And yet, for the first time, she believed they might have a future together, but Cedar Canyon had never forgiven debt so easily. And as the wind rattled the shutters, Rowena wondered what tomorrow's dawn would bring. Would it be quiet hope or the thunder of hoofbeats she could not outrun? The first pale light of morning stretched over the Boone Ranch, painting the ridgeline with soft gold and stirring the valley's sleepy hush. Birds chattered in the cottonwoods, and a jackrabbit darted through the sage as Rowena stepped out of the cabin, the baby tucked into the crook of her arm. and the crisp mountain air pinching her cheeks. She moved carefully across the dirt yard, still damp from last night's rain. The goat pen sat a short distance from the main house, its occupants already bleeding with hunger. With one hand cradling Jebediah, she managed to scoop feed from the bin, scattering it into the trough. The goats jostled each other noisily, and Rowena couldn't help but smile. A moment of normalcy. Behind her, Wyatt emerged from the barn, sleeves rolled to the elbow and hair damp from a quick wash. He carried 2 metal pails filled with fresh milk. "Mornin'," he said. "You sleep any?" "Little bit," she replied. He fussed, "But I think the quiet helps." Wyatt nodded, setting the pails near the porch. "He'll settle in. Kids do better when the land around them breathes right." Rowena turned her gaze to the distant ridge. "It's beautiful out here, like the land forgot to be cruel." He looked at her, serious. "It remembers. Just takes longer to show its teeth." That morning passed in a blur of new tasks. Wyatt showed her how to stack the firewood properly, how to twist twine for kindling, and how to identify the local herbs growing wild beyond the fence line. She listened carefully, her hands clumsy at first but growing more certain with each. By midday, Jebediah was asleep in his cradle, and Wyatt poured them both cups of coffee brewed over the stove. They sat on the porch, boots resting on the step, the horizon stretching out like a promise that hadn't yet been broken. "I meant what I said yesterday," Wyatt began, eyes still on the fields. "I didn't offer you charity." Rowena stiffened, fingers tightening on the tin mug. "You didn't?" He shook his head. "I need someone who can hold this place together when I'm gone. I ride out once a month to the Western Cattle Post. Gone for 3 days, sometimes more. Ain't safe leaving the land alone. You know how to keep a place?" She nodded slowly. "My father was a trapper. Before he died, he taught me how to mend snares, check for tracks, keep meat dry and firewood dry. Mama was the one who kept the rest going. Then I reckon you'll do just fine." They fell into silence again, broken only by the buzz of cicadas and the wind brushing against the shutters. When Wyatt spoke again, his voice was lower. "There's a ledger behind the stove. Every transaction I've made since I took the land. If something happens to me, you'll need to know who owes what and who doesn't." Rowena turned sharply. "Why would something happen to you?" He shrugged. "Because people don't always like when a man minds his own business. Especially when that business rubs up against someone else's profit. Like those men at the store." He gave a small, grim smile. "They work for the Breckons, big ranch south of here. They think they own Cedar Canyon. Don't take kindly to me holding ground they couldn't buy." She felt a shiver work down her spine. "You think they'll come here?" "I think they'll test you first." That afternoon, Wyatt saddled his horse and rode to the far pasture to check the fences. Rowena stayed behind, heart beating a little faster now, as she kept watch on the horizon. Nothing stirred beyond the distant shimmer of heat. Late in the day, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the land, a rider appeared on the trail. Not Wyatt. A tall man in a tan coat and black hat trotted toward the ranch, reins loose in one hand, the other resting on his thigh. Rowena stood at the door, Jebediah cradled in one arm, the other gripping the edge of the doorway. The man dismounted smoothly and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said. "Name's Levi Brecken. Thought I'd drop in, neighborly-like." She nodded stiffly. "Wyatt's not here." "I figured. Just thought I'd introduce myself. Never know when you might need help way out here." She said nothing. He stepped closer. "You his new woman?" Rowena's jaw clenched. "I'm helping with the ranch. That's all." Levi smiled, though. It didn't reach his eyes. Folks in town might talk different. She shifted her weight, rocking the baby gently. "We're doing just fine." "Well," he said, drawing a card from his coat, "if you ever change your mind, maybe don't." Want to raise a child out in the dirt and weeds. Come by the South Ranch. There's easier ways to live. Rowena took the card but didn't look at it. Thank you, we're fine. He tipped his hat again, then mounted up and rode off down the trail. She didn't relax until he was gone. That night, when Wyatt returned, she told him everything. He listened without comment, then finally said, "Don't ever take anything from them. Not even water." Rowena nodded, and they sat long into the night, not speaking, listening instead to the hush of the canyon and the slow breathing of the baby by the fire. Before we continue, would you live this far off the grid? Drop A if this is your kind. Of Place. New chapter drops tomorrow. Don't miss what happens when Wyatt confronts Levi and a long-buried truth rises to the surface. The wind shifted before dawn. Rowena woke to the sound of it sighing through the cracks in the loft walls. A low, uneasy whisper, like the land itself was bracing for something. Jebediah stirred beside her in the cradle, cooing softly. She pulled the wool blanket tighter over her shoulders and tiptoed to the ladder. The room below was still cloaked in the deep blue of pre-dawn. Only the stove's faint glow pulsed from under the iron belly, coals keeping the hearth breathing through the night. She descended silently. Wyatt sat at the table, already dressed, eyes fixed on a ledger he hadn't opened since the day she arrived. A mug of black coffee steamed in his hand. When he looked up, the weariness in his eyes hit her like a stone. Didn't sleep? She asked. Didn't want to, he murmured. Dreams bring back the kind of men we don't invite in daylight. He closed the ledger with a soft thud. Is it Brecken? She asked. Do you think he's coming back? Wyatt stood slowly. I think he never left. Men like that live in the soil. You can plant good seed, feed your stock, raise a barn. But he's always there, just under the surface, waiting. He reached for his coat. I've got to ride out to Dalton's Crossing, he said. Fence broke last storm. Cattle'll wander into the gulch if I don't mend it. Rowena opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. The look on his face was iron-willed. You'll stay armed, he added. I left the Remington behind the door. She followed his gaze and saw it, the revolver, gleaming faintly where the light kissed its barrel. I've never fired a gun, she whispered. You won't need to, he said. But knowing how's different from wanting to. He was gone before the sun crested the canyon wall. His horse's hoofbeats faded into the hush, and Rowena stood in the doorway for a long time after, baby in her arms, the Remington tucked into her apron pocket. Heavy and alien. By mid-morning, a dust trail shimmered on the horizon. 2 riders, Rowena, spotted them from the garden where she was boiling herbs for a poultice. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, wiping her hands on her skirt, and crossed to the porch. The riders came slow, deliberate. She recognized the second one first, Levi Brecken. The man beside him was older, broader, his gray coat trimmed with fur, his hat resting square on his head like a crown. His mustache curled cruelly at the corners. Rowena's stomach dropped. Morning, miss, Levi said, dismounting first. Hope we're not intruding. You are, she said flatly. The older man smiled. Polite girl, I'm Cole Brecken, Levi's father. Owner of the land south of this parcel. I know who you are. Then you know we don't come without reason. Heard you're squatting here now. Thought it best to clear up misunderstandings before someone got hurt. Rowena gripped the edge of the doorway. I live here, with Wyatt. We're not squatting. Cole clicked his tongue. Funny. Last we checked, Boone's deed expired. Tax filings never reached county. Technically, that makes this government land. Or at least land without a name on it. And you, miss, are trespassing. That's a lie, she said, heat rising in her chest. Could be, he said. Or could be a very useful technicality, depending who asks. He stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. But we're reasonable folk. We'd be willing to overlook the matter entirely for a favor. Rowena stiffened. What favor? He glanced at the cradle through the window. Seems like a child's no place for a homestead in dispute. You give the boy to us, we'll make sure he's raised right. Strong, fed. Rowena's blood turned to ice. You think you can take my son? Cole shrugged. Not today. But laws favor men with paper and power. Give it time, miss. You'll tire of defending what's already lost. She stepped backward and slammed the door. The porch creaked as the two men retreated. Minutes later, she heard hooves recede. Still, she didn't move. Not until Jebediah cried did she fall to her knees, sobbing. That evening, Wyatt returned to find her by the cradle, the Remington resting on her lap. I saw them, she whispered. I told them no. Wyatt knelt beside her, cupping her cheek. And that's the only answer you'll ever need to give. He stood, anger coiled in his spine. They'll come again. Next time, not with words. The following day was spent in preparation. Wyatt retrieved 2 more rifles from the barn's false floor. He taught Rowena how to load, aim, and brace. Her hands shook, but her aim was true. They boarded the windows, reinforced the door, and sealed the back with crates. Rowena cooked in silence. Wyatt hammered planks over the pantry's roof. That night, they slept in turns. Wyatt by the door, Rowena in the rocker with the baby. 3 nights passed. On the 4th, the storm came. It rolled in from the east, black clouds clawing at the moonlight. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the canyon like a battlefield. Rain lashed the rooftop, and thunder cracked so loudly that Jebediah woke screaming. And beneath the storm, boots. Rowena heard them first, faint, muffled, then a voice outside. Wyatt Boone. This ain't no longer your land. Come out and make it right. Wyatt cocked the rifle. Stay with the baby, he whispered, but Rowena followed. The porch was slick, wind tearing at Wyatt's coat. 4 men stood under the eaves, rifles across their backs. Levi was among them. Cole wasn't. This doesn't have to get bloody, Levi called out. It won't, Wyatt replied. Because you're going to ride away. We've got the writ. Sheriff says you're overdue. Homestead claim expires at dawn. I've got receipts, and I'll show them to the judge, not to you. 1 man raised his rifle. Rowena fired. First, the crack of the Remington split the storm. The man's rifle flew from his hand as he staggered back, howling. Wyatt raised his weapon. Next one's in the chest, he growled. Silence fell, broken only by thunder. Then, one by one, the men mounted and disappeared into the night. Back inside, Rowena collapsed against the door. Wyatt caught her before she fell. You fired, he said softly. I didn't think. You thought of him. He looked toward Jebediah. That's enough. They sat in silence until the storm passed. Outside, the land drank deep. Inside, something unspoken settled between them, the kind of bond that came not from rescue, but from standing together when no one else would. Before we continue, would you have pulled the trigger? Drop a if you'd have protected your own. Tomorrow's chapter. The sheriff arrives, and with him, an offer that may tear Wyatt and Rowena apart. The next morning dawned cool and thick with silence. Wyatt stood by the fence line, hat low, shoulders set. A layer of fog hung like a blanket over the valley, curling around the cabin's eaves and soaking into the porch planks. Birds dared not sing, and even the goats stayed close to their shelter. Inside, Rowena sat at the table, drying her hair by the stove. Jebediah gurgled in the cradle, unaware that the night before had changed everything. She'd fired a gun. She'd watched men ride away with fear in their eyes. She'd stepped across a threshold she couldn't return from. She rubbed her thumb over the Remington's handle now, tracing the worn grooves. I didn't hesitate, she whispered to herself. Wyatt stepped inside. He was still damp from his walk, water clinging to his boots. He glanced at her, then at the weapon on the table. "You shouldn't have had to," he said quietly. "But I'm proud you did." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked past him to the ridge beyond. "Think they'll come again?" He nodded once. "But not first. Someone else will." That someone came an hour later. A lone rider crested the hill, a tall man on a pale gelding. He rode slow, hands open, wearing a brown leather duster and a silver star pinned to his chest. The sheriff. Wyatt stood on the porch, rifle across his arms. Rowena stayed by the window, heart pounding. The sheriff dismounted and raised his hands. "Peaceful visit," he called out. "Wyatt, I need to talk." Wyatt motioned toward the porch. "Then come up and speak plain." Sheriff Josiah Marks climbed the steps, boots heavy. He was a weathered man, face lined by sun and stories. "I got word," he began, "that shots were fired out here last night." "They were," Wyatt said. "And?" "Levi Brecken brought armed men to my home, claimed a sheriff's writ, tried to seize the land." Marks exhaled slowly. "That's not how we do things. I didn't issue anything. Brecken's been pushing. But he don't speak for my badge." Wyatt narrowed his eyes. "Then why come?" The sheriff reached into his coat and pulled a folded paper. "Because this writ is real, signed by Judge Packer. He says your claim expired. Without taxes filed, the parcel reverts to the territory." Rowena stepped out then, voice hard. "We have records," Marks nodded. "I know. I also know that. Those records were stolen from the Cedar Canyon clerk's office 2 weeks ago. Whole filing drawer gone." Wyatt looked like stone. "That's Brecken's doing. Can't prove it," the sheriff said. "Not yet. But I can give you a choice." He laid the paper on the porch rail. "Judge says the land's to be auctioned in 10 days. If you want it, you'll have to bid." Publicly, Wyatt's hands clenched. "With what money?" Marks shrugged. "That's not my say. But I'm telling you now so you have a chance. Others wouldn't." Rowena took a step forward. "How much?" "Opening bid's 200. She blinked. $200? The sheriff tipped his hat. "Boomland's got good water and grazing. There'll be bidders. Brecken's coming in high." He turned to go, then paused. "You've got 10 days. I suggest you prepare." They watched him ride away, the fog parting around him like a curtain. Wyatt turned to Rowena. "We don't have that kind of money." "No," she said. "But maybe I know someone who does." That afternoon, Rowena penned a letter. It was short. A name, a location, a request. The next morning, Wyatt rode hard for the northern ridge, where a telegraph line ran through a supply post. He returned by sundown. Face unreadable. "What did he say?" Rowena asked. "He'll come," Wyatt answered. "Says he owes you." Rowena didn't explain further. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a covered wagon rolled up the trail, flanked by 2 mounted riders. At the reins sat a woman in fine traveling clothes, her black gloves spotless. Behind her, standing in the wagon, bed with crossed arms, was a man with a weathered face and eyes sharp as razors. "My brother," Rowena said quietly, stepping onto the porch. The wagon halted. The man stepped down, hat in hand. "Row," he said. "Been a long time," she nodded. "Thank you for coming, Elias." He nodded at Wyatt, then took a slow look around the property. "This the land?" "It is. You want to keep it?" She nodded again. He turned to the woman beside him. "Cut the check." She opened a satchel and pulled out a folded document. $250, Elias said. "That enough?" Wyatt looked stunned. "Why?" Elias shrugged. "Because she's family. And because she once saved my life." He turned to Rowena. "You remember that day?" She nodded. "I pulled you from the river. And now I pull you from the fire." The auction was held in Cedar Canyon's courthouse. Wyatt wore his cleanest shirt. Rowena held Jebediah tight. They stood on one side of the hall. Across from them, Levi and Cole Brecken sat like vultures. Judge Packer opened the proceedings. "We have one parcel for auction, Northern Boone Range, including water rights. Opening bid, 200. 250, Elias called out from the back. 270, Cole replied, face red. 300, Elias countered. The room stirred. Cole stood. 350, Elias smiled. 500. Gasps rippled. Judge Packer blinked. 500, going once. Withdrawn. Cole snapped. The gavel fell. Sold to Mr. Elias Carrington, proxy for Rowena Caldwell Boone. The hall erupted. Outside, Rowena collapsed into Wyatt's arms. "You have your land," Elias said. "Now keep it safe." Then he was gone, but peace did not last. 3 nights later, the barn burned. Wyatt woke to the smell of smoke and the scream of animals. He and Rowena rushed outside to find the structure engulfed. Flames roared into the night, lighting the valley in cruel amber. Wyatt grabbed the bucket. Rowena ran to the well. It took until dawn to douse it. The goats were gone. The roof had collapsed. Only embers remained. On the ground near the gate, Wyatt found it, a brass button, stamped with a ranch insignia, Brecken. "This is war," Wyatt said, voice hoarse. Rowena nodded. Soot streaked across her face. "And we're not backing down." "Before we continue, would you have gone to the auction or fought another way? Drop a if you'd have bid." Next chapter. Wyatt lays a trap and the night ends in blood. The smoke from the burned barn still lingered in the valley like a warning, curling into the pines and staining the morning sky with a faint smear of ash. The land was quiet, too quiet. Even the goats that had survived the blaze found wandering in the brush, dazed and singed, still wary. Something had changed. Something vital. Wyatt didn't speak much that day. He walked the perimeter of the property with the rifle slung across his back, boots leaving tracks in scorched dirt. Every so often, he knelt and ran his fingers through the blackened grass, eyes scanning the horizon. Rowena followed at a distance with Jebediah strapped to her chest. Her arms ached, her lungs still burned from the smoke. But she would not rest. Not yet. They buried the dead animals in a long trench behind the east fence. Wyatt did the digging. Rowena wrapped each carcass in burlap. Neither of them cried. Only after sunset did Wyatt finally sit on the porch, elbows on knees, jaw tight. "They won't stop," he said flatly. "Not until they take everything." Rowena sat beside him. "Then we don't give them the chance." He glanced at her, then nodded slowly. "We set a trap." The next 3 days were a blur of motion. Wyatt rode out to the old mine road, where an abandoned line shack sat in ruins. It hadn't been used in years, not since the claim ran dry. But the path leading to it ran right past the Boone property, unmarked. Easy to mistake for a shortcut or escape route. Rowena kept the home steady. She milked the remaining goats, tended the garden, and sharpened tools by lamplight. When Wyatt returned, he brought barrels of pitch, rusted bear traps, and a sack of nails. "We rigged the shack," he explained. "If they come back, they'll try to circle behind the house. This time, they'll find more than fire." That night, they worked by lantern. Wyatt taught her how to coat the doorway with pitch and hang a fuse string through a vent. Rowena spread powder around the shack's floor, mixing it with fine sawdust and grain, anything to make it catch. They baited the place with fresh feed and water troughs. From a distance, it would look like a hidden storehouse. A prize. All they had to do was wait. It happened on the 5th night. Rowena had just put Jebediah down when the dogs began to bark. She froze. Wyatt stepped out of the shadows by the hearth, rifle already in hand. "Back room," he said quietly. "Stay there. If you hear me fire more than once, go to Elias." She nodded, heart hammering, and slipped into the nursery, bolting the door. Outside, the darkness moved. 3 riders approached from the ridge. Wyatt crouched on the porch, eye trained on the moonlit path. The smoke from the burned barn still lingered in the valley like a warning, curling into the pines and staining the morning sky with a faint smear of ash. The land was quiet, too quiet. Even the goats that had survived the blaze found wandering in the brush, dazed and singed, still wary. Something had changed. Something vital. Wyatt didn't speak much that day. He walked the perimeter of the property with the rifle slung across his back, boots leaving tracks in scorched dirt. Every so often, he knelt and ran his fingers through the blackened grass, eyes scanning the horizon. Rowena followed at a distance with Jebediah strapped to her chest. Her arms ached, her lungs still burned from the smoke. But she would not rest. Not yet. They buried the dead animals in a long trench behind the east fence. Wyatt did the digging. Rowena wrapped each carcass in burlap. Neither of them cried. Only. After sunset did Wyatt finally sit on the porch, elbows on knees, jaw tight. "They won't stop," he said flatly. "Not until they take everything." Rowena sat beside him. "Then we don't give them the chance." He glanced at her, then nodded slowly. "We set a trap." The next 3 days were a blur of motion. Wyatt rode out to the old mine road, where an abandoned line shack sat in ruins. It hadn't been used in years, not since the claim ran dry. But the path leading to it ran right past the Boone property, unmarked. Easy to mistake for a shortcut or escape route. Rowena kept the home steady. She milked the remaining goats, tended the garden, and sharpened tools by lamplight. When Wyatt returned, he brought barrels of pitch, rusted bear traps, and a sack of nails. "We rigged the shack," he explained. "If they come back, they'll try to circle behind the house. This time, they'll find more than fire." That night, they worked by lantern. Wyatt taught her how to coat the doorway with pitch and hang a fuse string through a vent. Rowena spread powder around the shack's floor, mixing it with fine sawdust and grain, anything to make it catch. They baited the place with fresh feed and water troughs. From a distance, it would look like a hidden storehouse. A prize. All they had to do was wait. It happened on the 5th night. Rowena had just put Jebediah down when the dogs began to bark. She froze. Wyatt stepped out of the shadows by the hearth, rifle already in hand. "Back room," he said quietly. "Stay there. If you hear me fire more than once, go to Elias." She nodded, heart hammering, and slipped into the nursery, bolting the door. Outside, the darkness moved. 3 riders approached from the ridge. Wyatt crouched on the porch, eye trained on the moonlit path. He recognized the horses. Brecken stock, branded. They didn't head for the house. They took the mine trail. Wyatt waited. 10 minutes passed. Then dash boomed out. The earth shook with a violent roar. Fire burst into the sky at the edge of the trees. The winds of Cedar Canyon shifted again, not in temperature, nor in the scent of the rain-laced pines, but in something subtler, heavier. It began with a letter left at the edge of the gatepost. No courier, no tracks. Just a folded paper tucked under a rusted horseshoe nailed to the beam. Rowena found it early, before the sun crested the rim of the valley. She had Jebediah on her hip, still in his nightshirt, and her hands smelled of goat milk and oatmeal. She read the note 3 times, lips trembling. It read, "I heard you kept him. I'm coming, Nathaniel." She didn't cry, didn't scream, just folded the paper again and tucked it deep into her apron. By the time Wyatt rose and found her washing vegetables by the trough, she was already holding it like a thorn between her ribs. "Morning," he said, pausing at the steps. Rowena didn't look at him. "Someone's coming." Wyatt's brow furrowed. "Who?" She hesitated, then handed him the letter. He read it silently. Once, then again. "Nathaniel," he said flatly. "That's the one who—" "Yes." Jebediah cooed, oblivious. Wyatt stared at the note for a long time, then folded it slowly and slid it into his shirt pocket. "When?" he asked. I don't know. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Then we prepare. By sundown, Wyatt had reinforced the gate, checked the rifle stocks, and trimmed the bushes near the porch windows where someone might hide. Rowena didn't protest. She sat on the porch with Jebediah in her lap and stared into the long fall of the canyon, remembering a younger version of herself, naive, frightened, desperate. Nathaniel had been her undoing once. He wouldn't be again. He arrived 2 days later. A black horse rode in at dusk, moving slow. The rider wore a city coat, dark wool, polished boots, no hat. His face was shadowed until he dismounted. Nathaniel Whitcomb. His hair was longer now, a little grayer. He moved like someone used to smooth floors and soft hands, not broken land. Rowena stepped off the porch. Wyatt stood just behind her. Nathaniel removed his gloves. Rowena, Nathaniel. His gaze shifted to Jebediah, who peeked out from the sling tied around her shoulder. His eyes darkened. So it's true. Rowena nodded once. Nathaniel looked at Wyatt. You the husband? I'm the one who stayed, Wyatt said coolly. Nathaniel gave a small smile. Didn't come to argue. Just want to see the boy. No, Rowena said flatly. He blinked. I have a right. You forfeited that right the moment you turned your back on me. I begged you. You knew what I was carrying. Nathaniel's expression darkened. I didn't sign up for a scandal. Wyatt stepped forward. You're about to walk into one. Nathaniel exhaled and took out a document. Then let's keep this clean. I'm here to file custody. I'll go to the court if I must. Rowena snatched the paper and read the seal. Filed with a judge from Silverton. A petition for visitation. With request for guardianship. You're not taking him, she said, voice shaking. I'll fight, he replied. I've got lawyers. And money. Wyatt's hand hovered near his holster. Rowena shook her head. Let him leave. He'll hang himself in town. Nathaniel turned away. But before mounting, he spoke one last time. I come back in 5 days with the order. Be ready. Then he rode off. That night, Rowena paced the cabin like a caged animal. Wyatt sat by the fire, oil lamp flickering across his face. You all right? He asked. She stopped. He'll win. He has money, reputation, all the things I don't. Wyatt stood and crossed to her. He doesn't have you. She buried her face in his chest. I won't let him take my son. Then we fight differently. This time. The next morning, Rowena dressed in her mother's old shawl and rode into Cedar Canyon. She left Jebediah with Wyatt. Her mission was clear. Find anyone who could testify, anyone who remembered. Anyone who saw Nathaniel leave her that day, pregnant, alone, broken. She found 4. The trading post keeper, the Reverend's wife, the stable boy, and an old midwife who remembered Rowena crying by the river. They signed statements, swore oaths. When she rode back that evening, her dress was soaked in sweat, but her face shone with a wild fire. He won't take him, she said. Handing Wyatt the papers, he smiled. You're braver than you think. On the 4th day, a letter arrived by courier. Hearing scheduled. County Courthouse, 1 week. They rode in together, Rowena holding her son, Wyatt silent beside her. The courtroom was stuffy, filled with unfamiliar faces. Nathaniel stood with his lawyer, a tall man in spectacles who wore an expensive suit like a weapon. The judge, an aging woman named Delia Hartford, called order. Mr. Whitcomb, you seek guardianship? Yes, Your Honor, sole custody. And you, Miss Caldwell? I seek to keep my son. I have witnesses. Over the next hour, testimonies poured in. One by one, the townsfolk spoke of how she'd begged for help, how he'd denied her, how Wyatt had taken her in without condition, how she'd fought to make a home. Nathaniel's lawyer argued reputation, stability, finances. When the judge called recess, no one moved. Delia returned 20 minutes later with reddened eyes. I have made my decision. she said. This court recognizes Miss Caldwell as the primary caregiver and guardian of Jebediah Caldwell. Custody remains hers. Nathaniel's face collapsed. Wyatt put an arm around Rowena. Jebediah clapped. Outside, the wind picked up. But for once, it felt clean. Before we continue, would you have gone to court or run? Dropeth if you'd have stood your ground. Next chapter. Wyatt's old injury resurfaces and forces a decision that could tear their family apart. The courthouse decision should have felt like a final breath of relief, a door closing on danger. But peace in Cedar Canyon never held for long. And that night, as they rode back toward the ranch, Rowena noticed Wyatt's hand tremble on the reins. Cold? She asked gently. He nodded, then winced. Just tired. But it wasn't just that. The tremble worsened over the next 2 days, first in his hand, then in his shoulder. On the third day, he dropped a hammer while repairing the barn's side rail. On the fourth, he collapsed while hauling water from the spring. Rowena screamed and rushed to his side. Wyatt pushed her away, chest heaving. I'm all right. But his lips were pale. His eyes blooded. She saw the truth then in the set of his jaw, the effort it took him to stand. This wasn't just fatigue. It was something old. Something buried. That evening, she sat by the fire as he dozed on the cot. Jebediah played quietly with wooden animals on the rug. The light flickered across Wyatt's face, casting sharp lines across his brow. Rowena touched his hand. You fought in the border wars, didn't you? She whispered. He opened his eyes. Long time ago. And you got hurt? He said nothing. Tell me. Wyatt sighed. Got thrown from a transport cart. Broke 3 ribs. But it wasn't the bones that cursed me. It was the shrapnel they never found. Lodged somewhere near my spine. She stared at him, heart thudding. They said it might stay quiet, he continued. Or it might shift. And now? It's shifting. Rowena's breath caught. Can you ride? Some days. Not many left. She looked away, blinking. Hard. And what happens when it gets worse? He didn't answer. Over the next week, the signs multiplied. He lost feeling in 2 fingers, then 1 leg. The goats went untended. The garden grew wild. Rowena tried to keep pace, cooking, carrying, mending. But the weight of it all pressed hard. One night, Wyatt woke screaming. She ran to him, cradling his face. What is it? Legs, he gasped. I can't feel my legs. She helped him sit up, tears brimming. We need a doctor. There's no one here who can help. There's one in Silverton. That's 3 days' ride. Then I'll ride. No. You. Don't get to die on me, Wyatt Boone. He looked up, startled. You saved me, she whispered. Now let me save you. The next morning, she left at dawn, riding hard. She carried Wyatt's medical papers and a single note he had written in a shaky hand. Treat her like you'd treat me. She's more than I ever was. Silverton was busy, dust and carriages and the endless hum of rail tracks. Rowena rode straight to the clinic, heart in her throat. The doctor, a tall man with a trimmed beard and sharp eyes, took the note, read it, then looked her over. When did symptoms start? 2 weeks. Bring him, I'll operate, but it's dangerous. Spine surgery in a field clinic. I don't care. Just help him. He nodded once, then get him here. 3 days, no more. Back at the ranch, Wyatt refused. I won't have you risking the boy for me. You're not dying in that bed. I may not survive surgery. You definitely won't survive not having it. He looked at her, pain raw in his eyes. If something happens to me, you taught me how to live, she whispered. I'll teach him how to remember you. Wyatt's resistance cracked. He nodded. They built a stretcher and lashed it to a borrowed cart. Elias sent 2 riders to help, and they left at midnight under a moonless sky. The journey was slow. Wyatt drifted in and out of consciousness. Rowena fed him broth and pressed cold cloths to his head. Jebediah rode beside them, silent, sensing. The shift. In Silverton, the doctor waited with a lantern. They wheeled Wyatt inside. The door closed. And Rowena waited. The surgery took 7 hours. At the end, the doctor stepped out, pale and shaking. He's alive. The shrapnel's removed, but the nerve damage. He'll live? Yes, but he may never walk again. Rowena nodded slowly. Then we begin again. She brought him home 3 weeks later. Wyatt was thinner, paler. But his eyes were bright. She built him a chair with wheels from wagon parts. Jebediah pushed him across the porch with squeals of delight. Wyatt laughed for the first time in months. The land healed. And so did they. Before we continue, would you have made the journey? Drop a if you'd have risked it for love. Next chapter. Rowena receives an unexpected letter. One that offers riches, but at the cost of leaving everything behind. That morning, Rowena found the envelope waiting on the porch swing clean. Cream-colored, sealed with dark wax, stamped into a fleur-de-lis. Her name was penned in elegant copperplate. Wyatt sat beside her in his wheeled chair, Jebediah leaning against his knee. The world beyond the cabin felt still, as if the canyon itself held its breath. She broke the seal with a fingernail and unfolded the letter. Mrs. Caldwell. The script was unmistakable. Lady Adrienne Beaufort, of Beaufort Hall, England. One of the great estates lost to debt in the turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars. It has come to my attention that you, a direct descendant of my late cousin Victorine Beaufort, now reside upon property that originally formed part of our family's Western holdings. While the Caldwell-Boone homestead stands under American law, I write to offer a different arrangement. Return to England, reclaim your birthright, and take stewardship of Castle Beaufort. In recognition of your circumstance, I am prepared to provide full passage and an annual stipend of £1,000. Rowena's breath caught. She looked up at Wyatt. They want us to leave. Wyatt studied the letter. £1,000 is a fortune. She read on. Of course, regaining any claim to property will require legal formalities and the swearing of fealty to the crown. It also brings with it responsibilities of lineage, court appearances, and the expectations of high society. If you remain in America, this offer lapses and any claim becomes null. Should you accept, instructions for the shipping of your belongings and arrangements for Jebediah's guardianship until he comes of age are enclosed. I await your reply. Silence followed. The wind through the pines was a sigh. Rowena rolled the letter carefully. England. Wyatt's lips pressed into a thin line. Your home. Jebediah reached up to touch her face. She smiled through tears. I never thought I'd see this. Wyatt wheeled himself closer. What do you want? Rowena stared at the far ridge. I have everything here, but we almost lost it all. This land, it made us who we are. Wyatt's eyes glistened. Beaufort Hall is more than just land. She shook her head. It's a future I never believed possible, but I ... Her voice broke. He took her hand. No matter where we go, we're together. Jebediah giggled, drumming. On Wyatt's knee, Rowena closed her eyes. The letter felt heavy in her pocket parchment, promise, and peril. That night, they sat across the hearth. Jebediah asleep, the stove's embers a dull glow. Wyatt reached into his coat and produced a small locket. Inside was a portrait of young Rowena, hair silvered by the dye of London salons, wearing a gown embroidered with her family crest. I kept it, Wyatt said. You said family meant everything. She touched it, voice soft. But family is also freedom, Wyatt nodded, understanding. If you go, you'll have to leave the ranch. She looked up, determined. But I'll carry it with me, in every sunrise. They fell silent, choosing love over certainty. Before dawn, Rowena saddled a horse. Wyatt's hands steadied hers as she tied Jebediah to the saddle's pommel in his riding basket. He held the letter in his palm. Accept it, he whispered. Then we choose the path together." Rowena nodded, tightening her shawl. As they rode toward the eastern trail, the first rays of light painted their shadows long across the sage. Behind them lay home. Ahead, the promise of inheritance, responsibility, and a life beyond the canyon's rim. But one last horizon waited. And they would face it side by side. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The carriage wheels rattled over the cobblestones as dawn's pale light crept across the English countryside. Rowena leaned forward in her seat, the soft leather cushions of the Beaufort carriage still strange beneath her fingertips. Beyond the window, fields of lupin and heather stretched like a sea of purple waves, dotted with ancient oaks whose gnarled branches whispered secrets to the wind. Jebediah sat on her lap, swaddled in a blanket of emerald green borrowed from Lady Adrienne's collection, his wide blue eyes darting curiously from the passing landscape to the distant silhouette of Beaufort Hall. The castle loomed atop a craggy hill, gray stone walls rising in tiers like watchful sentinels. Its towers caught the morning light, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns and formal gardens below. Wyatt sat opposite, his custom wheelchair adapted for travel, large wooden wheels and a sturdy frame that creaked softly over each bump. He offered Rowena a smile that was both proud and tentative, as if testing the solidity of this new reality. "It's more imposing than I imagined," she whispered. He nodded. "A place like this carries a history, good and bad." Rowena rested her hand on the carriage door, drawing strength from the smooth wood. 10 days ago, they had ridden away from Cedar Canyon with nothing but a letter and a promise. Now they arrived at a world she'd only glimpsed in storybooks. One of lords and ladies, of debts and dowries, of lineage written in stone. The carriage came to a halt at the great iron gates. 2 liveried footmen in crimson and gold flanked the entrance, caps in hand. Lady Adrienne stepped forward, an elegant figure in a silk riding habit, curls of pale hair peeking from beneath her bonnet. "Welcome home, cousin," she said, voice warm but formal. Rowena climbed down first, arms full of Jebediah, then helped Wyatt from the carriage. Each movement felt deliberate, as if she were rehearsing a role she had yet to learn. They passed under the archway, the gates clanging shut behind them. A long driveway led to the front entrance, where a trio of servants waited, cloak-bearers. A footman and the castle's steward, Mr. Langley, a thin man with spectacles perched at the tip of his nose. "Master Boone, Mrs. Boone," Langley said, inclining his head. "May I assist you?" Wyatt pointed at his chair. Langley stepped forward, positioning a ramp near the carriage so Wyatt could roll smoothly onto the stone terrace. Rowena followed, breathing in the scent of roses clipped from the garden. Inside, Beaufort Hall was a cathedral of high ceilings, stained glass windows, and tapestries depicting bygone battles and long-dead Beauforts in ornate armor. Chandeliers of wrought iron dripped from the rafters, their candles unlit in the growing daylight. Lady Adrienne guided them through a series of corridors to the great hall, where a breakfast table laden with fine china and silver awaited. Rowena flinched at the gleam of polished silver, not the sturdy tin mugs and cast-iron skillet of the ranch, but delicate tea sets and crystal canters. As servants bustled about, pouring tea and setting plates of smoked salmon and egg tarts. Before them, Rowena took her first sip, the warmth and slight bitterness of the brew surprising on her tongue. "I've arranged accommodations in the East Wing," Lady Adrienne said, gesturing gracefully. "Your suite overlooks the orchard. I thought you might like some light." Rowena nodded, glancing at Wyatt, who gave an encouraging nod in return. Breakfast passed with polite conversation, Lady Adrienne inquiring about Jebediah's health, Wyatt speaking of the journey, and Rowena catching herself once or twice before referring to the ranch or her old life. Every word felt weighed in gold. Afterward, Langley escorted them upstairs through a smaller corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. At the end, a heavy oak door opened onto their suite. 2 adjoining rooms, one with a canopy bed draped in damask curtains, the other with a writing desk and a settee. A side-lighted doorway revealed a small nursery painted in pale yellows, with a crib waiting beneath a mobile of painted birds. Jebediah's eyes lit up at the sight of the crib. He reached out a tiny hand. Rowena's heart clenched. This was home. Now that afternoon, Lady Adrienne took Rowena to the library, a soaring room of floor-to-ceiling shelves bursting with leather-bound volumes. A ladder on wheels ran along the shelves, and a grand window offered a view of the rose garden, its blooms a riot of crimson and ivory. "Here," Adrienne said, pointing to a shelf, "the Beaufort genealogies." She pulled out a heavy tome. Gilded with the family crest, a stag and a fleur-de-lis intertwined. Rowena opened it, fingers trembling as she read the names. Victorine Beaufort, her great-great-aunt, married to a diplomat whose travels took her across Europe. Then her father's line branching westward to the American frontier, where her great-granduncle had staked a claim and handed down deeds that included this very land. "It's our legacy," Adrienne whispered. Rowena closed the book gently. I feel its weight." "You're the one chosen to bear it," Adrienne replied. "Beaufort Hall needs a steward who understands land, who cares for people. You've proven yourself." Rowena swallowed, images of the dusty ranch and the raging barn fire flooding her mind. Beaufort Hall's grandeur, beautiful as it was, felt fragile, something to protect, not own. That evening, after dinner in a candle-lit dining room ringed with ancestral portraits, Rowena slipped away to the terrace. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the sky blazed with apricot and amethyst. Wyatt joined her in his wheelchair, Jebediah asleep in a shawl on Rowena's lap. "I wonder," she said softly, "if I can do this." Wyatt took her hand. "You already are." She leaned against him, listening to the distant owl's call. The rose garden shimmered below, paths twisting like the future's possibilities. Suddenly, a cold gust stirred the starlight. Rowena's breath caught as a figure emerged from the shadows of the lawn, a tall silhouette in a cloak. Head held low. Her heart skipped. "Rowena!" a voice whispered. Her breath froze. The figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a woman. She did not recognize a stranger in black velvet, eyes glinting silver. "Welcome home," the woman said, voice like velvet and steel. Rowena's heart thundered as the stranger lifted a hand, the flicker of a ring catching the moonlight. "What do you want?" Rowena managed. The woman smiled, a slow curve that promised secrets and danger. "Beaufort Hall has many walls," she said softly, "but some doors have been left open for far too long." And in that moment, Rowena realized that inheritance was not just a gift, it was a gauntlet thrown, and the real trial had only just begun. Rowena's heart hammered in her chest as the cloaked stranger's words echoed across the terrace. The moonlight caught the glint of silver in the visitor's eyes, and in that harsh illumination, Rowena saw not a friend, but a herald of storms. "Yet to break. Beaufort Hall has many walls," the woman said, voice hushed but sharp as flint. "But some doors have been left open for far too long." She stepped closer, trailing velvet that rippled like dark water. In her gloved hand, she carried a small wooden box bound with iron clasps. "My name is Maribel Claremont," she continued, "former custodian to the House of Beaufort and protector of its deepest secret." Rowena shifted, clutching Jebediah tighter. Wyatt leaned forward in his wheelchair, eyes narrowed. "Secret?" Rowena repeated, voice brittle. Maribel nodded once. "When your ancestor Victorine fled east, she took with her not only the family name, but a trust placed upon her by the crown. The crown jewels of Beaufort were hidden in this castle, gems said to hold the magic of our lineage. But only the true steward may recover them." Rowena's pulse throbbed so loudly she feared the walls would hear. She glanced at Wyatt, whose jaw had gone rigid. "Why now?" she asked, Because the deed has passed, and the heir has returned, Maribel replied, lifting her chin. But the castle will fall to ruin if its legacy is not honored. The jewels are locked within the crypt beneath the East Tower, sealed with Victorine's cipher. No one has dared break that seal ... until tonight. She lifted the iron-bound box and placed it gently in Rowena's hands. The wood was cold and smooth, carved with the fleur-de-lis and stag crest. Inside the lid lay a piece of parchment, yellowed at the edges. To the one who bears my blood, only with heart and courage aligned will you unveil that which was hidden. Seek the pillar that bears the raven's mark beneath the moon's embrace. Rowena's breath caught as she read. Her fingers trembled on the brittle paper. What does it mean? She whispered. Maribel traced the map with a slender finger, a sketch of the east wing corridor, the crypt entrance marked with a raven, under the archway of carved ravens, where the moonlight falls like silver water, there you will find the hidden latch, Maribel explained. Pull it, and the door will open to the chamber below. Only then will the vault reveal itself. Why should I trust you? Rowena demanded, voice quivering. Maribel's gaze met hers, unwavering. Because I am the last living witness to Victorine's oath, to guard her secret until the bloodline returned. It has taken decades for that promise to be kept. A distant bell told the hour, its mellow notes vibrating through the stones of the hall. Rowena closed the box, rising to her feet. Wyatt wheeled closer, his voice soft but insistent. You have the right to choose, he said. But know this, the choices we make tonight will bind us to our family's fate. Rowena steadied herself with one hand on the parapet. Jebediah. Stirred, eyes heavy with sleep, she swallowed. Show me. Maribel inclined her head and led the way down the corridor. Torches flared in sconces, casting flickering shadows on the tapestries. They passed portraits of stone-faced Beaufort's Victorine holding her newborn son, then her grandfathers and grandmothers, all watching as Maribel guided Rowena to a recessed archway carved with ravens, under the pale moonlight streaming through. A high window, the raven's eyes seemed to gleam with life. Rowena placed her palm against the smooth, stone-cold as winter dusk, and pressed a hidden recess at the raven's throat. A soft click sounded. The wall before them shuddered and swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a narrow staircase descending. Into darkness. Maribel whispered, Remember, only the true steward's blood will unlock the vault below. Rowena stepped forward, hearthfire burning in her veins, determined despite the dread that coiled in her stomach. She tightened her cloak around Jebediah and signaled Wyatt to hold Maribel's lantern higher. Each step took them deeper beneath. Beaufort Hall, the air growing cooler, the stone walls slick with age. At the bottom, a heavy iron door stood between them and the lost treasures of Victorine Beaufort. Its surface was inlaid with the stag and fleur-de-lis, entwined in intricate filigree. Rowena raised the wooden box, placing it against the crest. The keyhole pulsed like a heartbeat. She took a steadying breath and turned the clasp. The lock groaned as ancient. Gears turned. A distant thunder rolled through the foundation, and a shard of moonlight pierced the chamber's narrow slit. The door began to open, but before it could reveal the vault's shadowed interior, a crack echoed behind them. Maribel's lantern flickered. Wyatt's gasp swallowed the hush, and in that moment, Rowena realized they were not alone in the crypt. A voice, low and resonant, whispered from the darkness, You should not have come. Silence fell. The iron door shuddered on its hinges and swung inward with a metallic groan, revealing a vaulted chamber beneath Beaufort Hall. A single beam of moonlight pierced a narrow slit overhead, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the still air. The shadows clung to the stone walls like living things, and the heavy scent of earth and age pressed against Rowena's lungs. Wyatt wheeled himself through the threshold, lantern held high. His fingers trembled as he guided the light across the crypt. Maribel followed, silent as a wraith, while Rowena cradled Jebediah close, Heart hammering with every step, rows of ancient sarcophagi lined the chamber's periphery, each carved with the crest of a Beaufort ancestor. Their lids bore images of sleeping knights and maidens in repose, eyes closed as though in peaceful eternal slumber. In the center stood a stone plinth supporting a jewel-encrusted chest bound by black iron bands. Rowena's breath came in ragged wisps. She approached the plinth, eyes fixed on the chest's filigreed clasp. The locket's parchment lay open in her hand. Only with heart and courage aligned will you unveil that which was hidden. She drew a steadying breath and reached forward. Maribel was beside her in an instant. "Wait," she whispered, voice tense. Something stirs beyond the arch. A low rumble echoed through the crypt. Rowena's pulse lodged in her throat as she guided her trembling fingers over the inscription around the chest's lip. Line of ancient Beaufort verse in Old French. Celui qui porte le sang. Ouvre si qui est skell. Wyatt wheeled closer. The one who bears the blood opens what is sealed. Rowena closed her eyes and pressed the iron-bound key, Victorine's cipher-bound key, into the chest's central slot. The gears inside clicked and groaned, and the iron bands fell away in a cascade onto the stone floor. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in crimson velvet, lay 6 gemstones, a sapphire the color of a mountain lake, an emerald green as fresh spring. Moss, a ruby aflame with inner fire, 3 smaller diamonds shimmering like starlight, and at the center, a teardrop opal shifting with rainbow hues. Their surfaces gleamed with a light not of this world. Rowena gasped, unable to tear her gaze away. The gems had a silent magnetism, as though they breathed. Behind them, the crypt door slammed shut, plunging the chamber into darkness save for the lantern's halo and the faint glow of the jewels. Wyatt wheeled backward, heart thundering. But his warning came too late. From the far corner, a figure emerged. A man in black riding leathers, face hidden beneath a cowl. His eyes glowed like coals, fixed on the opal. Rowena's hand froze on the chest's edge. Jebediah whimpered. "Quite the inheritance," the stranger said, voice low as wind through bare branches. "But born of blood does not always mean worthy of its power." Rowena swallowed, voice catching. "Who are you?" He stepped into the moonlight. A scar mapped the length of his cheek, and his gaze burned with cold intensity. "Call me Raven," he said, "and I've come for what you stole." Maribel stepped between them. "You have no claim." Raven's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Claims are for the law. Power demands no permission." With one swift motion, he lunged toward the chest, hands outstretched. Rowena's world narrowed. For a moment, time slowed hoofbeats, hammering in her ears, the stone walls pressing closer. Jebediah's cry echoing like alarm bells. And then a gunshot rang through the crypt. Wyatt's Remington spat flame in the darkness, smoke curling into the lantern's glow. Raven staggered, clutching his side, dark blood blossoming on his coat. "Run!" Wyatt shouted, voice ragged but urgent. Rowena grabbed the chest and tucked it beneath her arm, snatching Jebediah close to her heart. Maribel ushered them toward the stair, the stranger's snarled curses trailing behind like a curse. They sprinted through the crypt's shadowed vaults, boots echoing, the chest's weight heavy against Rowena's side. Behind them, Raven's enraged voice called, "You can't hide from your legacy." They burst into the moonlit corridor, chest held tight, lungs burning, and as the archway groaned closed behind them, Rowena realized the true test had begun. To protect her family, she would have to embrace the power she'd only just reclaimed and face the darkness that sought to claim it first. Rowena pressed her back against the cool stone, chest rising and falling like the tide. The heavy door of the east crypt had slammed shut behind them, rendering any return impossible. Jebediah whimpered against her shoulder, and she kissed his forehead, closing her eyes to steady her racing heart. Wyatt's lantern cast jittering shadows on the corridor walls. His voice, though strained, carried a firm note. "We need to move, now." Maribel led the way with nimble steps, her cloak swirling behind her. The hush of the East Wing corridors echoed with their footsteps. Portraits of stern ancestors seemed to watch them pass, eyes unblinking, lips forever sealed. Rowena realized how precarious their position was. In her arms, the chest of glimmering jewels felt impossibly heavy. They'd fled without a plan, only raw instinct. But instinct alone would not keep them safe. Maribel paused at a branching hallway. She touched a stone carving of a peacock, and a hidden panel shifted open, revealing a narrow passage. "Through here," Maribel whispered. "This leads to the servant quarters. Few will follow." They slipped inside, the tunnel's air damp with age. A faint drip of water echoed. Rowena's nerves tightened like quicksand, pulling her weight down. "How did you know?" Rowena asked, glancing at Maribel's face, lit by the lantern. Maribel's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "I led the first search party here 70 years ago. It nearly cost my life." She paused, voice soft. "I owe Victorine my life. I'd do it again." They emerged into a dimly lit servant's wing, the stone giving way to wood floors and low ceilings. A pair of widowed junior housemaids, Elsbeth and Margaret, stood in a corner, eyes wide at the sight of a chest and armed strangers. Rowena held up a hand. "Forgive us, we need your help." The maids exchanged a nervous glance. Elsbeth swallowed. "M'lady, we owe you everything." "We'll help," Margaret nodded vigorously. "We'll guide you to the West Gardens. There's a hidden door in the greenhouse." Wyatt wheeled forward, hand to his shoulder, a pained grimace crossing his features. "We'll need fresh horses and supplies." Elsbeth hurried off to fetch linen wraps for Jebediah, while Margaret led them through a narrow service door to the courtyard. The moon hung low over the gardens, silvering the statues and rosebush. The air smelled of jasmine and damp earth. They crept to the greenhouse, a glass and iron structure at the garden's edge. Margaret unlocked a hidden latch. The door swung inward, revealing shelves of tropical ferns and orchids, their leaves shimmering in the lantern's glow. Margaret directed Wyatt to a wooden table where 2 saddlebags lay. "Fill these with food, blankets. Leave the chest here for a moment." Rowena hesitated. "Are you sure?" Margaret nodded. "The kitchen will send a cart at dawn. I'll keep it safe." Rowena took a trembling breath, placed the chest into Maribel's arms, and helped Wyatt roll toward the door. Jebediah gurgled, oblivious. The journey outside the gardens was slower. The cold air bit at Rowena's cheeks as they reached the stone stables at the estate's far side. Margaret greeted them with 2 saddled horses, Wyatt's black gelding and Rowena's new mount, a gentle bay mare. Elsbeth handed Wyatt a folded blanket for his legs. Wyatt swung into the saddle, voice tight. "Thank you. Godspeed." Rowena climbed up behind him, arms wrapping tight around his waist. Maribel took Jebediah, stepping onto the mare's croup. The maids returned inside, doors closing softly behind. Wyatt touched her arm. "Stay low." They slipped through the stable's side gates into the dark fields beyond. The night air stung their lungs. Rows of cold stone hedges and low walls jutted like broken bones across the grounds. They navigated by moonlight, shadows shifting around them. Rowena felt Raven's presence behind them, an invisible weight, a promise of pursuit. She urged the mare forward. Wyatt's gelding followed Dot at the edge of the property. They paused. Ahead lay a bramble-choked service road leading to a small supply depot near Beaufort's western border. Wyatt dismounted, helping Rowena and Maribel down, then flicked the reins toward the horses. "We'll reach the depot at dawn. Lay low until then." Rowena nodded, voice tight. Maribel tucked the chest under a thick bramble. "Be careful." Ravens. No ordinary thief. A distant howl of wind carried across the field. Raven's voice drifted, mocking. I'll wait. They bolted, hearts pounding, forging into the night. Meanwhile, in the crypt below, Raven spat out blood onto the stone floor. His coat seared by Wyatt's shot, he clutched his wound and staggered toward the ancestral sarcophagi. You cannot hide what is yours, he hissed, touching the lid of a distant tomb as if summoning its power. A tremor shook the crypt. Raven staggered. The original cipher key, once buried beneath Victorine's coffin, began to glow with pale green light. He smiled, pain forgotten. Then I'll claim it, he whispered. And in the east wing above, Rowena, Wyatt, and Maribel fled into the night, unaware that the castle itself had awakened to their trespass. Before we continue, would you have trusted the maids? Drop of if you'd lean on unlikely allies. Next chapter, Raven discovers Victorine's secret pact and prepares his own ritual to seize the jewel's power. Beneath Beaufort Hall, Raven knelt in the crypt's subterranean gloom, the opal's pale fire reflected in his eyes. Narrow beams of moonlight filtered through cracks in the vaulted ceiling, painting his crimson-stained cloak in spectral hues. The crypt's ancient stones seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, a slow, hungry drumbeat that mirrored the dark promise in his soul. He laid the chest of gemstones on Victorine's sarcophagus, its carved lid etched with the family crest. The sapphire, emerald, ruby, diamonds, and the opal each held a fragment of Beaufort power. Legend said they were gifts from continental courts, tokens of royal favor, and talismanic conduits of ancestral magic. But it was the opal that mattered. Its multicolored fire could awaken dormant lineages. Raven pressed his palm against its cool surface and felt a tingle, like an electric pulse racing along his veins. By blood and oath, he intoned, kneeling, I call upon the ancient pact. He opened Victorine's coffin, revealing the cipher key carved into ivory bone. With shaking fingers, he traced the runic grooves of Victorine's seal. He whispered the old words half forgotten in the tongues of curators and scholars, invoking the covenant between crown and clan. A low hum filled the chamber. The gemstones pulsed brighter. Mist curled around Raven's feet. The ancient sarcophagi trembled. Yet, as power surged, so too did something older and darker stir in the crypt's depths. A presence awakened from centuries of silence. Upstairs, Rowena, Wyatt, and Maribel raced through the darkened fields toward the supply depot. Jebediah slept against Maribel's shoulder. The horses' hooves pounded the dirt road, each thud echoing like a heartbeat of hope and fear. We must reach the depot before dawn, Wyatt panted, pain flickering through his eyes. Rowena nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon. In her heart, the weight of the jewels grew heavier, as if aware of Raven's bidding below. Back in the crypt, the gemstone's light coalesced into a pillar of luminous mist. Raven's chant reached a crescendo, his voice bold and unyielding. Suddenly, the sarcophagi lids shifted. Stone lids carved with sleeping Beauforts cracked and slid aside. From within, hollow-eyed phantoms stirred, pale figures bound in marble. Awoken by the opal's fire and Raven's dark incantation, he stood, eyes aglow, triumphant. Rise, my kin, rise and claim what is rightfully yours. Maribel, back at the greenhouse, felt a tremor beneath her feet. She halted, lantern lifting. Something's wrong, she whispered. Rowena's horse reared beside her. The earth, she said. At the crypt's edge, toying with his prize, Raven laughed a sound like a shattered mirror. Above, the first rays of dawn spilled over the western fields. But in the crypt below, a new dawn rose in shadow. Before we continue, would you face the crypt's phantoms? Dropeth if you'd walk into the darkness. Next chapter, the phantoms rise in Beaufort. Hall trembles under the weight of its resurrected lineage. The true battle for the gemstones begins. Rowena Caldwell Boone awoke to a world she scarcely recognized. The halls of Beaufort Hall silent beneath a morning sun that painted its towers in soft gold. Yet her heart pounded with the echo of last night's terror. The scent of cold stone still clung to her cloak, mingling with the sweetness of roses from the greenhouse where they had hidden the chest of jewels. She sat in the carved oak armchair of her suite. Jebediah nestled at her side and watched Wyatt Boone wheel himself toward her across the scarlet rug. His face was pale but determined. The fine linen of his traveling shirt was still neatly pressed from yesterday's ride. She pressed her fingers to her lips, recalling the final moment underground Raven's shadowed threat, the slam of stone. Behind them, morning, he said quietly, voice hoarse with fatigue. He paused by the window, gazing out at the vast estate grounds beyond. You slept at least enough. Rowena rose, smoothing her skirts, and placed the child in Wyatt's arms. Jebediah squirmed, reaching for the window's handle. Wyatt lowered. His gaze to his son rubs his cheek. You ready? He asked, turning his face to her. Rowena swallowed. The memory of Raven's wounded swagger beneath the crypt still raw. The glint of his scar. The hot spray of Wyatt's bullet, the scream muffled by thick stone. We need to move the gems, she whispered, stepping closer. He nodded, slipping his injured fingers into hers. That one touch steadied her. Maribel's arranged for a secure vault in the west wing, he said. Under the old guard room, Rowena frowned. A vault deep beneath Beaufort's kitchens? Would that be safer? Wyatt rested his hand on her shoulder. Less foot traffic. Few even know it exists. She closed her eyes, grateful for his calm. The room felt smaller now, walls draped with Beaufort tapestries that whispered of duty and destiny. In the harsh reality of last night, she realized that Benton Ranch's dusty simplicity had been a refuge. Beaufort Hall was a gilded cage grand, but vulnerable to shadows that walked unseen. Wyatt wheeled toward the door, determination etched on his veteran's face. Ready? She nodded, steeling herself. Let's go. They found Maribel Claremont in the library, seated before the hearth, her normally pale features drawn tight with concern. A fire crackled in the hearth, its glow reflecting in the rows of leather-bound tomes that lined the shelves. Thank you, Rowena said, voice trembling. Maribel's eyes flicked to Wyatt's arm, still bruised from where he had supported her. Beneath the crypt's arch. Sit, Maribel said, placing a hand on Wyatt's chair. I have arrangements ready. She turned and swept her arm toward a hidden panel behind a shelf. The books glided aside to reveal a narrow stair descending into warm torchlight. The smell of smoke from distant kitchens whispered through the crack. This door leads to the servants' guardroom, and beneath it, the old wine cellar. The vault is further down, in the old icehouse stone lined with an iron door. I've arranged for new locks and a warded mechanism. Only you three have the keys. She handed Wyatt a small ring of 6 iron keys, each stamped with the Beaufort crest. Rowena accepted the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. Warm wood accents, old cold iron, each promising security and secrecy. Maribel led the way, torchlight flickering across the corridor's carved molding as they made their way off the east wing, and across the central courtyard. The morning air was heavy with dew. Distant birdsong mixed with the tinkle of the conservatory fountain. They reached a low side door near the kitchens, where Maribel paused. After you, she said. Wyatt wheeled through, Rowena and Maribel close behind. They descended ancient stone stairs, footsteps echoing as they passed through a stable-like guardroom with rusted pikes and crossed halberds hung on the walls. Beyond, the entrance to the wine cellar yawned, flanked by oak barrels still labeled. From decades past, Rowena felt her pulse slip into her ears as they passed the wooden racks filled with dusty bottles. She imagined thieves, ghosts, assassins all slipping through these shadows. She clutched Wyatt's shoulder for steadiness. Maribel unlocked an iron door on the far side of the cellar. A low rumble came as the heavy slab swung inward, revealing a smaller chamber of worn flagstones. In the center stood a thick metal door, framed by old frost iron that had once held fresh ice below. Now it served as an impregnable fortress. "This is it," Maribel whispered. She removed one key after another, testing each in the wards until they found the one that fit. Inserting it, she turned the ring 3 times, and the door clanged open. Inside lay an austere room lined with stone shelves. A narrow iron-bound chest, similar to the one in the crypt but locked tight, sat on a raised plinth. Rowena exhaled. She'd expected gold-lined sarcophagi or hidden alcoves, not this humble chamber. It felt sacred, stripped of pretension. Wyatt stepped forward, placing one hand on the iron-bound chest. "May this keep them safe," he murmured. Rowena locked the ring's keys inside the lockbox on a nearby shelf and pocketed the key to this chest alone. Maribel smeared sealing wax across the seams, stamping it with a ring bearing the Beaufort stag insignia. As the wax hardened, Wyatt and Rowena exchanged glances. "I should stay," she said softly. "Keep watch." He reached for her hand. "No, you've done enough." She shook her head. Maribel interrupted gently. "I'll remain. If anyone comes, I'll alert the steward." Wyatt and Rowena exchanged relief-filled looks. The library's seclusion restored some quiet to Rowena's thoughts. Back in the bright halls of Beaufort Hall, Rowena unwound, each step through the corridors a reminder of the life she had chosen. The gentle snore of Jebediah's afternoon nap echoed behind heavy drapes. Wyatt wheeled himself to the towering windows, staring out at the distant moors which rolled like storm-dark seas beneath a slate sky. "She's strong," Wyatt said, voice quiet with gratitude. Rowena sat beside him on a broad settee, weaving her fingers through Jebediah's soft blanket. "Maribel," she echoed. "She's family as much as any blood." Wyatt nodded. "We'll need allies." She leaned against her husband, heart swelling in defiance of last night's terror. Beaufort Hall glowed softly in the dying light. No mere building, but a cradle of secrets and responsibilities she had vowed to protect. And somewhere in its depths, Raven stirred his purpose dark as obsidian, his ambition a hunger impossible to sat. Rowena closed her eyes. "The real fight," she whispered, "is just beginning." And outside, the wind whispered through arrow-slit windows, carrying her promise across the ancient stone walls. She would not fail her family, not the one she'd chosen, nor the one she'd been born to. For in a world where legends sleep beneath the ground, only the courage to stand by the ones you love can truly awaken a legacy. The dawn mist clung to the heather and bracken across Beaufort's western moor, wrapping the land in cold quiet. Rowena Boone awoke in her suite with Jebediah sleeping peacefully beside her, the opal's faint glow woven into her dreams. Wyatt! Boone, though weary, was already awake, gazing through the window at the distant horizon. Forearms crossed, shoulders stiff with resolve, she rose and joined him, daylight revealing the vast expanse of fields and fences below. Maribel's warning echoed in her mind. Raven was no mere thief. He sought something older, darker, than gold or title. The phantoms in the crypt had answered Raven's call, but they were bound by family blood, and she carried that lineage. Now, in the adjoining nursery, Maribel had prepared a change of clothes for Jebediah, a wool tunic in forest green, embroidered with the Beaufort stag. Rowena knelt beside the cradle, brushing back her son's dark curls. Each breath he took was a reminder. This inheritance of land and secret would be his world. She pressed her lips to his forehead. "I'll protect you," she whispered. Wyatt's voice broke the hush. "We must move swiftly." Raven's ritual drew strength from the crypt, but he'll need to bind the gems if he's to command the phantoms fully. Rowena nodded. Breakfast awaited in the library, porridge with honey and fresh bread baked overnight. Over steaming cups of tea, they discussed their plan: secure the jewels in the vault, strengthen the warding spells around Beaufort's walls, and seek the counsel of the estate's historian, Professor Hugh Merivale, an aging scholar who knew. Victorine's Diaries by Heart. By mid-morning, the great hall bustled with servants escorting the chest's keys back to its secure chamber. Maribel led the ritual. She traced protective runes on each corridor arch with chalk mixed in lavender oil, chanting the ancient Beaufort wards that bound the estate to its rightful guardians. In the vault beneath the kitchens, Wyatt and a pair of trusted guards replaced the warded lock's tumblers, sealing the chest away until morning light. Throughout the day, Rowena attended Lady Adrienne Beaufort in the rose gardens, masking her anxiety with polite conversation. Beneath the trellis of climbing crimson and ivory blooms, she learned from Adrienne the politics of the manor. The neighbors at Havelock Manor feared Beaufort's power. The local vicar, Reverend Smythe, watched events with cautious eyes. And Professor Merivale, living in a crumbling lodge at the estate's edge, held the true key to understanding Victorine's legacy. As twilight drew near, Wyatt prepared for his ride. Though he could not walk, he mounted his wheelchair onto a sturdy cart drawn by Beaufort's finest gelding. He fastened his Remington revolvers across his tanned leather belt, assured Rowena, and set off down the winding lane toward Merivale's lodge. Rowena knelt by Jebediah's crib, brushing his cheek. "Be strong, my love. I have to hunt the darkness." Maribel joined her, placing a comforting hand upon her shoulder. "I will remain here, keep the wards, and guard the vault. Should Raven come, the phantoms will protect their own until you return." Rowena's breath caught. "Thank you." The path to Merivale's lodge wound through ancient oaks and open fields bathed in moonlight. Wyatt's cart clattered over roots and loose stones. When he arrived, Professor Merivale awaited on the porch, wide-brimmed hat and cloak, eyes bright behind wire-framed spectacles. "Mr. Boone," the scholar said, voice crackling with age yet clear, "you've come at a perilous hour." Wyatt lifted his chin. "We need your counsel. Raven has awakened the phantoms with the opal's power." Merivale's eyes narrowed. "The opal, the heart of Victorine's covenant. If unleashed, it frees the phantoms, but also grants power over the living. You must bind it, anchor its essence to the bloodline's oath." Wyatt nodded. "Tell me how." They entered the lodge's candlelit study, walls lined with stacks of yellowed tomes. Merivale lit a single lamp. "There is a ritual detailed in Victorine's diary. It requires the words of binding 6 verses sung at the 12 pillars of Beaufort Hall's great gallery at midnight." Wyatt's jaw clenched. "I may not reach them all alone." Merivale placed a hand on Wyatt's arm. "You will meet assistance family blood. Rowena must stand at your side." Wyatt's gaze clouded. "She's vulnerable with Jebediah." "A mother's courage burns brightest under threat," Merivale replied. "Gather your strength." Back at the hall, Rowena stoked the hearth. Fire, Maribel reading the protective runes by its glow. Wyatt returned beside Dawn, exhaustion etched into his face, but resolution clear in his eyes. Olive gray skies overhead. They gathered at dusk in the great gallery, an immense hall of marble pillars carved with Beaufort's crest, towering arches echoing with history. Each pillar bore a brass plaque inscribed with a verse from Victorine's diary. Ahead lay the opal pulled from its hiding place and laid upon a velvet cushion on a carved stone altar. Maribel and Merivale stood beside them, the chest's iron bands scattered at their feet. Rowena clutched Wyatt's hand. Jebediah slept in a cradle by the gallery door, the child's breath a fragile promise of tomorrow. At the moon's zenith, they began the ritual. Wyatt and Rowena chanted together, their voices crisp in the silent expanse. "By blood and oath, by hearth and bone, we bind what breaks what once was whole. By sapphire's truth and emerald's grace, by ruby's fire and diamond's face." Verse by verse, they advanced from pillar to pillar, pressing a drop of blood from Wyatt's forefinger onto each brass plaque. Maribel sprinkled lavender oil, and Merivale whispered counter charms beneath his breath. The air grew thick, heavy with power. Each verse resonated with the bones of Beaufort Hall. and the pillars glowed softly beneath the crowning verse. By Opal's tear and fortune's rise, return the watch, reclaim our ties. In family's name, in love's bright key, we seal the bond, the blood shall be. On the final chant, the opal on the altar flared, blinding them with iridescent light. A tremor shook the gallery, marble dust swirling around their ankles. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, then a sigh, not of wind, but of released dot, and high above, in the crypt beneath, the phantoms waned, their forms dissolving into motes of silver dust. Raven's echoing cry of rage reverberated through the stones. As the opal's power fled from his grasp, Rowena sank to her knees, Jebediah's soft cry waking her. She gathered him in her arms, tears of relief streaming across her face. Wyatt stood beside her, breath ragged, the vow fulfilled. Marivalie exhaled. Beaufort Hall breathes again. Maribel placed a hand on Rowena's shoulder. Your courage saved us all. And in that moment, wrapped in the tapestry of ancient stone and living blood, Rowena realized the truth. The greatest power lay not in the gems, but in the steadfast hearts that beat together, bound by family, forged by sacrifice, and awakened by love. As dawn broke beyond the gallery's stained glass, Beaufort Hall stood renewed, its walls warded, its legacy honored, and its guardians ready to face whatever new legends the future might bring. The first light of dawn crept across Beaufort Hall's eastern terrace, illuminating dew-kissed stone and the frost-lined petals of the rose garden. Rowena Boone stood at the window of her suite, Jebediah nestled in her arms, gazing out at the silent spires of the castle. Her heart hummed with quiet resolve. The ritual had bound the gemstones and dried the phantom's silver dust, but Raven's vow still echoed in the wind. Now the hunt would become the huntress. Wyatt Boone entered. On quiet wheels, bolstered by a cloak of midnight blue trimmed with silver braid. His eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, held a fierce light. He approached and gently took Jebediah for a moment, placing a soft kiss on the baby's temple before handing him back. Are you ready? He murmured. Rowena nodded, smoothing the wool shawl around her shoulders. She glanced at the oblong shape of the chest's hiding place under the iron-bound vault in the west wing. The valley air was cold, but adrenaline warmed her veins. Let's finish this, she said. They gathered in the great hall at mid-morning. The massive carved oaken table stood bare except for a single silver censer emitting thin ribbons of lavender smoke. Professor Hugh Marivalie, robes rumpled from last night's vigil, handed Wyatt a slender ivory horn from Victorine's collection. This we'll call the bloodline, Marivalie explained, voice husky. Its call resonates only for those touched by the gemstone's power. Maribel Claremont, cloak fluttering like a dark banner, laid out a map of Beaufort's grounds on the table. She traced a path with her finger. He has fled north, toward the old mill. The phantom's strength is gone, but Raven carries the opal's ember. Its light flickers within him. He'll try to harness it again. Rowena studied the map. The mill lay 2 miles from the lodge, nestled beside the river Calder, its wheel long since rotted away. The miller's cottage stood, abandoned but still standing, the perfect lair for a desperate man seeking solitude and shadows. I'll go, Rowena said, her voice steady. Wyatt, you stay here, protect the castle. He shook his head. No, I rode after him once. You rode beside me. We ride together. She reached out, touching his cheek. Not this time. The opal's magic still clings. I need to be unseen. Maribel stepped close, eyes grave. We'll need a distraction. The carriage drawn by 4 black steeds set to the east gate at high noon. Raven will hear the horn and come. That's when you strike. They pressed their palms together in a pact. Roy's courage, Wyatt's wisdom, Marivalie's knowledge, Maribel's loyalty. Rowena mounted the bay mare from the stables, its coat brushed to a gleaming auburn. Maribel adjusted the cinch straps, and Marivalie slipped the ivory horn into Rowena's saddlebag. "Blow the horn," Maribel whispered. "Only when you see him." Rowena nodded and rode out the stable doors, inhaling the crisp morning air. Wyatt and Maribel watched her from the courtyard. Shadows of concern etched on their faces. She guided her steed northward, the path narrowing into a winding dirt road shaded by ancient oaks. The forest hush pressed close, no birdsong, only the faint murmur of the river behind the trees. After a mile, the mill's silhouette emerged, a stone skeleton rising from the riverbank, its weathered walls spattered with moss. Sunlight filtered through broken windows. The door hung ajar. Isum Ounting. Rowena left the mare hidden in underbrush and crept forward, heartbeat a soft drum in her ears. The river's gentle roar echoed faintly. A breeze rustled fallen leaves. Inside, shadows pooled. In corners, wooden beams creaked overhead. The air smelled of damp oak and rot. She pressed a hand on the wall, pale paint peeling beneath her fingertips. A soft light filtered from a narrow corridor leading to the cottage. She skirted the millstones, stepping only where the wood was dry. The horn felt heavy in her thigh. Holster. She approached the cottage's back door, pushed it open on silent hinges. Raven stood in the center of the room, cloaked in shadows, the opal glowing like a molten tear at his chest. He drew incantations in the air with gloved fingertips. Eyes fixed on the gem, Rowena froze. He spoke in a low chant, an older language that twisted in the air. The opal flared, casting rainbows on the walls. Her heart pounded. This was her moment. Her choice, strike now or wait for the horn. Carefully she drew the ivory horn from its sheath. Raven's chant faltered. His head snapped toward her. "Rowena Boone," he hissed, stepping forward. "You endangered my power." She blew the horn. Its cry echoed through the mill and across the woods long. Regal, impossible to ignore. Raven's face tightened in fury. He clutched the opal to his chest and raised a hand. Maribel's plan unfurled. A distant crash thundered, rocks dislodged from a ledge above, spilling into the river below. The mill's foundation trembled. Raven whirled toward the window. That was her signal. Rowena drew a small silver dagger embossed with the stag crest. Raven's turn left the opal exposed. She lunged. They grappled. His gloved hand caught her wrist. The opal's light flared, burning through her cloak. He pushed her back. She drove the dagger forward. Raven recoiled, dropping the opal. It skittered across the floor, coming to rest beneath a fallen beam. He roared, raising both gloved fists. Rowena braced, heart in her throat, every lesson learned beneath Beaufort's stones pulsating through her blood. Wyatt's cavalry thundered across the clearing outside. Maribel's carriage and guards arriving in a tide of polished armor and drawn steel. Raven's eyes flicked to the window. Rowena seized her chance. She kicked him backward, knocked him off balance, then dove for the opal. His heavy boots thundered behind her as she clutched the glowing gem. She spun and hurled it into the roaring river beyond. It sank with a splash. A roar of anger tore from Raven's throat. Rowena thrust the ivory horn at him. "You lost." Before he could answer, weapons rang against wood. Maribel and guards stormed inside, surrounded. Raven fled toward the back door. Rowena pursued, heart thundering. In the courtyard, Wyatt's carriage formed a barrier, guards poised at its sides. Raven skidded to a halt, glancing between Rowena and Wyatt. He hissed, "This is not over." Then, cloak swirling, he vanished into the woods. Rowena sank to her knees, clutching the ivory horn, the thrill of victory and release surging through her veins. She rose to Wyatt's side, and he gathered her into his arms. "Together," he whispered. Rowena nodded, head against his chest, and as the sun climbed higher, Beaufort Hall stood triumphant, its guardians tested and proven, its legacy reforged by love, courage, and the promise of a new dawn. Dawn's first light spilled across the vast lawns of Beaufort Hall. gilding its towers in soft gold. Yet the peace was an illusion. Rowena stood at the east gate, the morning chill clinging to her shoulders. Behind her, the great iron door to the west wing vault sealed tight. Within, the gemstones slumbered, bound by last night's ritual. Wyatt joined her, his wheelchair's wheels tracing frost-lined tracks on the gravel. In his lap lay Jebediah, swaddled in a blanket of Beaufort tartan. Wyatt's gaze was fixed. On the mist-shrouded courtyard, beyond evidence of Raven's flight, horses tethered to the carriage, servants stirring. "Are you certain?" Rowena asked, voice low. "We left him with only Maribel's word." Wyatt's eyes met hers. "No stronger promise exists." At that moment, the clang of the distant mill bell summoned them. Raven's retreat to the mill had bought only a reprieve. Now the hunt resumed. With Marivelli's counsel fresh, they needed allies. An hour later, they arrived at the lodge of Professor Hugh Marivelle, nestled among oak trees whose leaves crackled with autumn's promise. The scholar stood by the front door, cane in hand, spectacles reflecting the dawn's glow. "Time is short," Marivelle said, leading them inside. Raven's bond to the opal still smolders. He'll call the phantoms again, and this time with vengeance. He guided them to his study, shelves groaning with ancient tomes. Victorine's diaries mention one final line, a blood oath that could bind Raven's magic forever, but only if sworn by those he wronged. Rowena's breath caught. "An oath?" "A vow sealed in blood," Marivelle replied. "You and Wyatt must enact it at the chapel ruins, beneath the old weeping ash. Speak the words together, your hands joined in truth. But beware, Raven will not allow it." Wyatt squeezed Rowena's hand. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The chapel ruins lay at the forest's edge, its collapsed walls entwined with ivy. The weeping ash stood sentinel, branches drooping like mournful arms. Moss-coated stones bore the faint traces of saintly carvings. In the center, a cracked altar still stood. Rowena and Wyatt approached, Jebediah asleep across both their laps. In a blanket cocoon, Maribel followed, lantern lit, a stout iron box at her feet. Marivelle produced a yellowed parchment, a transcription of Victorine's oath in Old French. Rowena unrolled it, voice quaking as she read. "By blood betrayed and promise broken, by child abandoned, vows unspoken. We stand in truth beneath this tree, to bind the dark and set us free. Only with both your voices and both your blood," Marivelle added. "Prick your fingers and let 2 drops fall upon the ash's roots." Wyatt took a ceremonial dagger from Marivelle. Its blade was etched with the stag and fleur-de-lis. He nicked his fingertip. Rowena did likewise. Crimson droplets fell onto gnarled roots, hissing as they touched the earth. They stood, hands clasped, voices steady. "By blood betrayed and promise broken, by child abandoned, vows unspoken. We stand in truth beneath this tree, to bind thee. Dark and set us free." A low wind stirred the branches. The air shimmered as if charged. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, broken by distant hoof beats, Raven and the phantoms returning. Marivelle pressed the parchment into Rowena's hand. "Finish it." Rowena raised her voice. "No more to harm, no more to fear, we seal this blood. The bond is clear, begone, foul shadow, wraith, and shade. By love and truth, your bonds are made." Lightning forked across the sky, the ground trembled. The ruins glowed in silvery light. Raven's approaching cry echoed through the trees. Rowena and Wyatt squeezed each other's hands. Together, they spoke the final word. A shock of pure light burst from the altar, cascading outward in a pulse that rent the sky and sent leaves swirling. The hoof beats halted. Through the clearing, Raven appeared, flanked by phantoms in tattered armor, eyes burning with malice. He raised his hand to seize the opal's ember, but the light washed over him, and his cloak disintegrated into black ash. The phantoms howled and vanished like mist in sunlight. Raven, his features twisted, dropped to one knee, gaze fixed on Rowena and Wyatt. "You've bound me," he snarled, voice ragged. Rowena stepped forward, fearless. "Your vengeance ends now." Marivel chanted softly, the parchment glowing. Raven's breath rattled as he stumbled back, and then, with a final roar, he collapsed into a pile of ash that scattered in the wind. Silence returned. Profound and healing. In the hush, Jebediah stirred, stretching tiny arms. Rowena gathered him close, tears of relief streaming. Wyatt embraced Rowena, voice soft. "It's done." Marivel knelt beside the altar, gathering the remaining ashes. "Raven's oath is ended." Maribel emerged from the shadows, her lantern flickering. "Beaufort's night of terror is over." They stood beneath the weeping ash, faces turned skyward as dawn's rays pierced the storm clouds. Raven's threat was ashes. The Opal's power had been sealed. The legacy of Beaufort Hall, bound by blood and love, was theirs to carry and to protect for generations to come. Rowena placed a gentle kiss on Wyatt's cheek. "Together," she whispered, "always." He replied, and as the sun broke through, the ruined chapel glowed with new light, proof that even the darkest legacies could be rewritten by the steadfast courage of those who dared to believe in love. Rowena Boone stood on the eastern ramparts of Beaufort Hall as the late afternoon sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and smoldering golds. In her arms, Jebediah gurgled softly, his small fists curling and uncurling, as the evening breeze tousled his dark curls. The world below, the sprawling rose gardens, the distant river valley, and the old mill lanes was bathed in fading light, and for a moment, Rowena felt as though they'd latched onto the very edge of dreams. But dreams gave way to dread when she caught movement at the foot of the wall. A lone rider, clad in dark leather, approached cautiously along the outer track. Wyatt, seated close behind her, reached for her hand, his weathered fingers curling around hers. "Someone's coming," she whispered, heart quickening. He nodded, his gaze fixed. "Not by the carriage." The rider reined in, dismounting with the grace of a practiced horseman. Rowena recognized the cloak, trimmed in the subdued red of Silverton County's constabulary, the mark of Sheriff Josiah Marks. "Sheriff," Wyatt called out, voice firm despite the distance. The sheriff tipped his hat, boots clicking against the stone. His face was etched with concerned lines of gravity that no amount of daylight could soften. "Double quotes, Mr. Boone," he said, nodding. "I hope I'm not intruding." Rowena lowered Jebediah in the cradle of her arms, stepping forward. "Not at all. To what do we owe the honor?" Josiah paused, eyes flicking toward the crenellations. "News travels fast. Word of the ruins at the chapel. The strange light. The vanishing of Mr. Raven. The halls of Beaufort weren't built for silence, but I've never heard them so quiet." Wyatt wheeled around to face him. "We bound the power, Sheriff." The stones themselves felt it. Josiah's gaze softened. "I'd heard of a woman and a man who held off a gang of outlaws at a trading post. They say she was a mother. They called her a shadow rider. Seems she's found new ground." Rowena's chest tightened. "What would you have of us?" "The North Road," Josiah said, lumbering forward. "Reports of ghostly figures near the old mill. Folks too frightened to investigate after dusk. I need someone I trust to look into it." Wyatt exchanged a glance with Rowena. "We've dealt with phantoms once. We can do it again." Josiah hesitated, then handed Wyatt a letter sealed with Silverton's crest. "Recruit a few reliable hands. Document what you find. And ... keep this quiet. Beaufort can't bear another scandal." Wyatt accepted the letter, breaking the seal. Inside lay orders to deputize Boone and Caldwell, deputizing them to assist the sheriff in maintaining peace in the county. Rowena felt a tingle of pride and a spark of new responsibility. In the cool evening air, as the last light faded, she realized that while they'd sealed Raven's magic away, Beaufort Hall and Cedar Canyon beyond needed guardians. And they were appointed by fate and by a sheriff's hand. She looked at Wyatt, wind catching her shawl. "We ride at dawn." Wyatt nodded, lifting Jebediah. "We'll need allies." Below the ramparts, in the candlelit great hall, Maribel Claremont. Organized supplies, lanterns, oil flasks, blankets, and 2 of Wyatt's last clean revolvers. Professor Merivale consulted charts and antique maps, marking the path to the old mill. The rose-scented air had chilled. The hearth burned warm, and— "Steady," Maribel glanced up when Rowena and Wyatt entered. "It's done?" Rowena placed the sheriff's warrant on the table. "Deputies at large." Maribel smiled a rare, genuine curve of her lips. "Then I'll prepare horses." "And horseshoes loud enough to echo off the mill walls." Merivale added, "Don't underestimate the Phantom's final marking. Raven's ash might still linger. Be ready." Wyatt leaned against the table, exhaustion and resolve mingling on his face. He pressed a hand to Rowena's shoulder. "We'll rest tonight. Then at first light we ride." Rowena watched him, heart swelling. In a single year she'd gone. From abandoned mother to trading post supplicant, to rancher's wife, to custodian of an ancient legacy, and now, sheriff's deputy on a phantom hunt. She'd never felt more alive, but beneath the grandeur of Beaufort Hall, at the point where roses brushed the ramparts and shadows stretched long across the courtyard, a last question whispered on the wind. Would their courage be enough to protect the world they'd fought so hard to build? As they prepared for the dawn, the castle stood sentinel behind them walls of history, gates of promise, and Rowena knew that the next sunrise would be either their greatest triumph, or the moment when legends fell once more. The road back to Cedar Canyon wound under an amber sky, the tail end of the autumn sun dipping low behind ridges of scorched earth and sagebrush. Rowena Caldwell Boone rode beside Wyatt, their horses steady on the gravelly path, each step echoing the hard-won peace they carried between them. In the cart's seat, little Jebediah slept wrapped in a star-patterned blanket, oblivious to the ghosts and gunfire they'd left behind. Behind them trailed Professor Hugh Merivale, his elbows draped over the cart's side as he peered out at the passing desert landscape. Maribel Claremont guided the lead horses with quiet confidence, cloak swirling in the wind like a raven's wing. "Feels strange," Rowena said softly, voice laced with both relief and longing. "Coming back after all of that." Wyatt glanced at her, the fading sun catching the silver in his hair. "We're carrying 2 worlds now," he said. "The one we built in Cedar Canyon and the one they said didn't exist anymore, Beaufort Hall and its secrets." Rowena nodded, remembering the creak of the trading post floors, the rattle of spurs as she'd entered with a baby and walked out with a family. She remembered every barrel, every whisper, every barrel of flour that became a feast. Cedar Canyon was the cradle of her healing. Beaufort Hall, the crucible of her rebirth. Ahead, the silhouette of the trading post appeared, bathed in twilight. The boardwalk stretched like a memory across the dusty street. Horses were tethered by the hitching posts, and a lone lantern glowed at the saloon doorstep. They disembarked in silence. Rowena carried Jebediah toward the swinging doors, boots echoing on sun-bleached planks. Inside, the familiar smell of old pine and coffee grounds wrapped around her like an old friend's embrace. A handful of townsfolk stirred at the counter faces, lined by sun and grit, eyes widening as they recognized the newcomers. Caleb Thorne, now graying at the temples, straightened from polishing a rifle. Emma Hawthorne, 5 years elder, set down a rag as she saw Rowena, Wyatt, and the baby enter. Rowena. Emma's smile was broad, warmth rushing across her lined cheeks. "You both back?" Rowena's chest tightened. She handed Jebediah forward. "Emma, meet my son, Jebediah," she said. "And this is Wyatt Boone, my husband." Wyatt tipped his hat, voice soft. "Good to be back." A cheer rose from the regulars, laughter ringing off oak beams. The trading post, for all its dust and hardship, had become a home. Caleb Thorne took Rowena's elbow. "Heard you were gone a while. Sheriff's made you?" Rowena nodded, eyes glistening. "Deputies, Caleb. Wyatt and I helped rid the county of some shadows," Caleb whistled. "Well, maybe we'll call you the Phantom Deputies now." Laughter followed, and for a moment, Rowena felt the scars of history fade beneath the saloon's rafters. Night fell over Cedar Canyon, settling cool and quiet. Wyatt and Rowena sat behind the counter. Jebediah nestled between them as they counted the day's takings, a far cry from the debts they'd carried the day they met. Emma poured coffee, and Caleb hummed a low tune from behind the barrel. Rowena sipped her coffee, taste sharp against her tongue. She weighed the journey she'd undertaken, the trading post that birthed her new life, the ranch where she'd learned to hope, the castle that challenged her heritage, the ruins where she'd sworn blood and oath, the journey home where she'd claimed her son's future. Wyatt watched her, concern laced with pride. "You okay?" She nodded, fingers tracing Jebediah's curls. "More than okay, I'm home." He reached across the counter. "We built this home together." Rowena leaned into his touch. "And we'll keep building one sunrise at a time." Outside, a lone tumbleweed caught in the lantern light, rolling lazily across the dirt street. The trading post's bell jingled as the doors swung open, once more new travelers arriving for rest and supplies. The wind carried their whispers down the boardwalk, of legends called prairie shadows and ghost deputies, of unexpected saviors and impossible journeys. Rowena smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to Jebediah's cheek. He cooed, eyes bright in the lamplight. The legacy of all they'd fought for nestled safe in her arms. And somewhere beyond the ridges, Beaufort Hall stood sentinel as always, its stones no longer silent, but echoing the laughter and courage of those who dared to believe. In Love's Power. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.